Welcome back to chessopenings.com. In today's video, we'll take a look at the middle and end game of the game Anand versus Carlsen, played in the World Chess Championship Round 1 of Sochi, Russia 2014. The position which we have in front of us on the board arises after the moves which we've discussed in the first video, Grunfeld, Anand versus Carlsen. You can check out that video by clicking here. Now here we've reached this position. The pawn structure is shattered for white, but he has attacking chances on the king side. The bishop on h3 is excellently situated in such a way as to prevent a rook from appearing on the c8 square. And black has to his favor a better pawn structure and a well-situated knight on e5, as well as chances to exploit the pawns in the long term. Now from here, Carlsen continued with the move knight to f7, presumably bringing this knight to the d6 square, or at the very least avoiding the move f3 to f4 with tempo. Now, it also seems possible that black could have continued in a more aggressive fashion with the move pawn to b5, and the idea of this move would be, perhaps, to open up the c4 square for the knight rather than retreating the knight to f7, and to prepare to bring the queen behind the pawn, and even perhaps to follow up with pawn to a5. And this would have been a very active continuation for black. But instead, Carlsen continued with the move knight to f7, again avoiding f4 with tempo. Anand did continue with the move pawn to f4 anyway here, presumably preparing the move f4 to f5. Queen to d6 was played, attacking the pawn on f4. And now, Vishy Anand centralized the queen with the move queen to d4, defending the pawn on f4, and also sidestepping the c file. Black continued with rook a to d8. Now, from here it might seem that the pawn on a7 is hanging, but after the move queen takes a7, black would quickly bring the rook back to the a8 square. And now, no matter how white continues, let's say queen takes pawn on b7, the move rook takes a2 is very strong for black. Black can then double rooks on the a file and continue his attack on the queen side. And as is so often the case in positions with opposite sides castling, this position would turn out to be favorable for black because it's the person who is attacking the king the quickest who most often profits in positions with opposite sides castling. Therefore, Anand did not capture the pawn on a7, even though it appears to be hanging. Instead, white continued with the move bishop to e6, sliding the bishop into this key square, and now getting ready to play the move pawn to f5 as quickly as possible. Carlsen continued with the move queen to b6, offering a trade of queens and opening up the d6 square, either for the knight or also possibly for the rook to come to d6, so that the bishop can be attacked with the move knight to d8. So black continued with queen to b6. Now it's here that Anand seems to make the most critical mistake of the game and allows black a chance for the initiative. Had Anand continued with the move queen takes b6, a takes b6, and now simply king to b1, planning to bring the rook to the c file, it appears that this would be the way to exploit black's slightly passive move earlier of knight to f7, since from here, white has no problems whatsoever in bringing the rook to the c file, and this would not have been the case had black played b5 and knight to c4 earlier, as we discussed. The lines which have been shown here are generally knight to d6, rook to c1, pawn to f5, preparing to bring the king to f6 so that the e7 pawn can be defended, rook to c7, king to f6, and from here, white appears to have a slight advantage since his rook has come to the c7 square, the crucial c7 square, observing the b7 pawns, the e7 pawns, and thereby limiting the knight on d6. In some of the videos and analysis which have been shown here, black plays knight e4 attacking the f2 pawn, but ends up sacrificing the pawn on b7 and potentially losing the pawn on b6 as well. And this position does appear to offer white some small winning chances. In any case, white has very little to fear in this position. Now, instead of trading queens on the b6 square and grabbing the c-file as quickly as possible, Anand instead retreated the queen to d2, and this move has come under some criticism. After the move rook to d6, as played by Carlsen, black is now aiming to play the move knight to d8, and as a result now, white has no chance of infiltrating the c-file, and so has lost one of the main ways that he could have fought for an advantage in this position. Instead, white still needs to fight as hard as possible for an attack on the king side, and so it also seems to me that the move pawn to h4 perhaps would have been a very accurate way to continue. Then after the move knight to d8, white can simply retreat the bishop to g4 and continue with the move pawn to h5. And the computers assess this move as approximately equal here. But instead, Anand played the move rook h to e1, signaling that rather than playing for h4 to h5, white is actually going to attempt to create some pressure against the e7 pawn. Black continued with knight to d8. The move pawn to f5 was played. And now an exchange of the last minor pieces took place on the e6 square after knight takes e6 and rook takes e6. Now again, from here, white is looking to attack the e7 pawn. There are still possibly chances of either side crashing through with an attack on the king, but as the material is beginning to be traded, this is starting to look less and less like a possibility. In fact, the game appears to be careening towards a draw. So rook takes e6 was played. Black now played queen to c7, giving a check, and at the same time protecting the pawn on e7. Naturally, king to b1 was played here. And now simply black continued rook to c8, finding a very active square for the rook and creating a battery down the c-file. You may wonder why black doesn't throw in the moves rook takes e6, and then let's say d takes e6, and then perhaps simply play the move rook to c8. In fact, it turns out that a very strong reply here would simply be the move queen to c3, apparently offering a pawn on c3, but of course at the same time threatening to bring the rook into the powerful d7 square, where it will be attacking both the e7 pawns and the b7 pawns. And so this idea of exchanging rooks on the e6 square actually simply opens up the d-file for white, and white will have sufficient compensation for this exchange. So the move rook to c8 was played. White now continued with the move rook d to e1, pressuring the e7 pawn. An exchange of rooks took place on the e6 square. Rook to d8 was played. Queen to e3 was played, attacking the e7 pawn. Now rook to d7. And now Anand played a wonderful little equalizing operation here. Anand played the move pawn to d6, forcing black to play e takes d6. Queen to d4, attacking the newly abandoned f6 pawn. Rook to f7 was played. F takes g6, h takes g6, and now rook takes d6, recovering the pawn. Black played pawn to a6, and now white played pawn to a3. And we've now reached this roughly equal endgame, where white is perhaps just a tiny bit weaker due to the fact that his h2 pawn and f2 pawn are separated from each other. But Carlsen was unable to make use of any of these factors. Many annotators have described that within several moves, black did have a slight opportunity to gain a better rook ending, but this came only as the consequence of another inaccuracy by white. Therefore, we'll end our analysis here and simply proclaim that the position here is roughly equal, with the queen and rook endgame having no real chances for a win for either side. That's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the game Anand vs. Carlsen from the World Chess Championship 2014 in Sochi, Russia. The game opened up with a Grunfeld, which was a surprising and aggressive choice by Carlsen, and after the move bishop to d2, Anand did not manage to get much out of the opening, and after a series of exchanges and some imbalanced positions, the game eventually reached this position, which is close to a draw. That's all for today, and we'll see you again soon.